Chapter 9. Saturday, late afternoon. I was just thinking that this morning when I made the lemonade, Doreen said. Because every time I go see Nan, she has either zucchini bread or muffins or something else yummy to come home with me. That's a good thing. She's looking after you. Sure, she said, but shouldn't I be looking after her? Mac nodded. And you are. You have to remember her mental state is what's really important right now. She has food. She has a roof over her head. She has money to spend, but what she really has now is a granddaughter who adores her. So you keep doing you, and she'll keep doing what she does. I really like the sound of that, Doreen said quietly. Just then, Mac opened another cupboard, pulled out a big pot, and put it on the stove with a bang. What's that one for? The noodles, he said. She brightened. What about the water? He nodded and said, I put the tea kettle on when you weren't looking. She glanced at the kettle, and sure enough, it was full of boiling water. He poured it into the pot and turned on the water, then he refilled the tea kettle and turned it back on again. Does it make it faster this way? Well, it's already boiled water, so it just has to heat up here because the pot itself has to heat up, he explained. By then, we can add more boiling water, and we should have enough to cook the pasta. So, does that mean we'll eat soon? Doreen asked in a woeful voice. He chuckled. Yes, it does. But it'll still be a few minutes, so we'll turn down the sauce and let those tomatoes cook. And then we'll leave the water here to boil, and I'll walk over to the neighbor's house to take a look at his heather. She brightened. He shook his head. She frowned. He laughed. And she glared at him. Yes, I'm going alone, he said. I want to make sure nothing else is over there. In that case, you should probably take my gardening gloves, she said, as she walked to the veranda railing and snagged the pair she had been using. He looked at her and shook his head. Why? What's wrong with my gloves? Then she looked down at them. They're perfectly fine for me. Mac took one of the gloves, slapped it up against his hand, and said, This is why. Doreen snickered. It's not my fault you're oversized. I'm not oversized, he growled. And if I'm not allowed to make weight comments about you, then you're not allowed to make weight comments about me. And with that, he spun on his heels and headed to the front door. She wasn't sure if he was joking, or if she'd offended him. She ran behind him and called out, It's fine, you know. At the door he paused to look at her and asked, What's fine? Your weight. He burst out laughing. I know it is, he said. And besides, not everything that's oversized is wrong. As soon as he said that, he winked at her and disappeared. She felt red-hot color wash up her neck and cheeks. And then she laughed because she'd asked for it by using that word. But still, with the animals trying to follow Mac, she was forced to stay inside because as soon as she opened the door, all the animals would run over to the house next door. And she already knew that was a no-go. The neighbor didn't like her to begin with. And he didn't like her animals either. She watched through the living room window as Mac went outside, knocked on the neighbor's door, and had a short conversation with Richard. Mac then walked to the heather with Richard, who was almost wringing his hands, as if worried about what else could possibly be found. Or worried he'd be blamed. Mac continued to talk to him, but the conversation was too quiet for her to hear, and that drove her crazy. Mac went through the brush carefully, trying not to disturb anything, and then finally straightened and smiled at Richard, who looked relieved. As Mac walked toward her, she returned to the kitchen, so it didn't look like she'd been waiting for him, and stirred the sauce again. As soon as he walked inside, the animals were immediately all over him, as if he'd been gone for hours. He scooped up Goliath this time and carried him into the kitchen. Goliath was half perched on his shoulders with his big guttural engine engaged, as Mac checked on the sauce. So you didn't find anything, huh? Doreen asked. Nope, he said cheerfully. much to his and my relief. Won't matter, she said. You already have the engagement ring. She was a hooker, Mac said briefly. At that, Doreen rounded on him, her hands going to her hips. She might have been a hooker, but that doesn't mean she couldn't fall in love, find a partner, and try for a better life. Hey, I didn't mean it that way. Yes, you did, she said mutinously. He rolled his eyes at her, lifted the tea kettle, and added all the boiling water to the pot. Maybe I did, he said. That was poor judgment on my part. She probably did want a different lifestyle. What you're also forgetting, she said, is someone in a vulnerable lifestyle needs to work for money. She's hardly going to throw away a diamond ring. Maybe, Mac admitted. But we have yet to know if it's real or not. I'll wait until I get that back from the office. So you will reopen the case now, right? He gave a heavy sigh. I don't really have much choice but to take a closer look. He replaced the lid on the pasta pot and then lifted it again and poured in a hefty amount of salt. Doreen stared at him. We've been over this before, he said. The salt is needed. None of the spaghetti I've cooked so far has tasted salty, has it? She shook her head. No, you're right. I don't understand why, but that seems to be the way of it. Exactly, so no panicking. She grinned. When can we put in the pasta? In a few minutes, he said. Hungry. Starving, she said, laughing. And so are all the critters. While she waited for the pasta to cook, she fed the animals. And then she stepped out on the deck and studied the little bit of a deck she had now. If she could get a bigger deck, she would really love that. She hopped off the side, mentally marking off how far she'd like it to go. She needed to go back inside. She didn't have a tape measure with her, but she wanted at least 12 feet added to her little deck, which would make it probably 17 feet total, so then another 3 feet would be even better. She took a large step and turned to face it, then nodded. She saw Mac by the doorway and said, I do think 20 feet might be good. 20 feet is big, Mac said. We'll have to measure it off and put up some sticks or something for you to visualize it better. So you can figure out if it's too big. Meaning it would dominate the backyard? Yes, he said. You still want things to look proportionate. Right. In that case, 16 is probably not bad. After dinner we'll check, he said. If I don't get called into work again, which I have been every day this week, we'll take out the tape measure and put some sticks in the ground, so you can think about it. She beamed at that idea. The spaghetti will be at least 10 minutes. He rolled his eyes at her and said, Hang on. Then he must have gone into the garage because she could hear the doors opening and closing, and then he came out with the tape measure. Together, they measured off 16 feet, which was pretty close to where she had estimated. He had a little stick in his hand. He used the hammer to pound it into the ground, and then they put one on the other side, too. Now if you take these two straight back to the house, he said, that's 16 by 16 feet. And that's pretty big. She nodded. But if we put stairs down this side or a stairway there, this could be a patio. Then she motioned at the rest of the space, which would be close to another 16 feet. He measured it off, nodded, and said, This is about 15. But if we attach the sidewalk on the side, which needs to be 3 feet minimum, that'll be 18 feet, and that leaves you the 3 to 4 feet for the garden. That works out quite nicely. Mac went to the garden, picked up some rocks, and laid out what they were looking at. Every rock he placed down, Muggs came to sniff, and Goliath hopped from one to the other, following the line. Thaddeus supervised Mac the whole time. It was a real family affair. Now, Mac said, the pasta should be done. Let's eat. She laughed. I'm more than ready. But now I'm really excited about doing something for myself, too. You should be, Mac said. You've done a lot for other people. Remember. It's all about balance. So think about what you want, and then we'll figure out what it would cost to do what you think is best.